Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Art Troublecast. Today's episode will focus on art cinema.
You know what I thought recently? How different the approaches to storytelling can be in art cinema. I saw a few of Bergman's films and then I put it up against Tarantino. And although they both have incredible expressive power, they create completely different worlds.
That's true. In Bergman's case, we're dealing with a very personal philosophical cinema that isn't afraid to tackle difficult topics like death, loneliness, or the meaning of life. Just think of the Seventh Seal, where he plays with the concept of time and death. Bergman doesn't just look for answers, he shows how excruciating the questions themselves are for us.
Definitely. The seventh seal is an example of his monumental depth. But what strikes me about Bergman is not only the content, but also the way he creates atmosphere. His use of space, silence, light, and shadow. All of this gives his films this dark, introspective quality. Each of his frames is like a painting painted with light. I don't know how you've noticed how important a role nature plays in his films. It's a background that at the same time emphasizes the emotions of the characters.
Exactly. He treats nature as a kind of reflection of the internal state of the characters. In Fanny and Alexander, we have a slightly different dimension. You can see Bergman in a more epic narrative version. There is greater dynamics here, but still the same deep reflection. Interestingly, Bergman was able to balance between intimacy and grandeur, as in this film. You can also see his mastery of working with actors. This is real art, the way he was able to extract emotion from people on screen.
I agree, but admit that this is not a film that promises some immediate pleasure. Bergman demands patience from the viewer, but gives him something much more valuable. This is definitely not a film for everyone, especially today when we are used to more quickly understood stories.
On the other hand, we have directors like Tarantino, who are absolutely not afraid to surprise and play with form, to play with expectations. Although Pulp Fiction may not be deep in the philosophical sense, it's undoubtedly a film that changed the way we think about narrative in cinema. He was the first to start playing with the nonlinear structure of the story in such mass cinema.
Yeah, Tarantino is an absolute master of narrative experiments. His whole idea of a narrative interwoven stories, seemingly random treats, is on the one hand a form of entertainment, and on the other, a way of talking the viewer out of their comfort zone. But it is definitely not filming for the sake of experimentation with every decision. Tarantino tries to enhance the aesthetic experience.
Apart from all those iconic dialogues, which are full of irony, sense of humor, and pop culture accents, we also have a very specific sensual side of his cinema. He always cares about colors and details in the frame. His characteristic stylization, which even in the Kill Bill creates extremely intense graphic shots.
In that sense, he has a very specific aesthetic, not just in terms of storytelling, but in terms of the image itself. Maybe it has something to do with his love of 70s films.
And to East Asian cinema, to Westerns. All these influences are mixed in his images in an extremely coherent way. And although there is a lot of violence in his films, this violence also has its aesthetics value. On the one hand, it's brutal, and on the other, it builds a certain almost artistic symbolism.
That's true. Violence in his films is not accidental. It has its place in history, but also in aesthetics. It is often almost like a kind of ritual. Remember the scene from Django and his monumental, slow way of filming shots. You watch it and you get the impression that it is not longer just violence, it's almost painting.
If you are talking about sensuality and visuality, it's impossible not to mention Wes Anderson. His work is at the other extreme, but still incredibly expressive. Anderson is a master of recreation and incredibly orderly, symmetrical image. In each of his films, regardless of the subject, the world looks like something from a children's book, overly elaborate, almost theatrical. In the Grand Budapest Hotel, you can see the best. Every frame is a work of art. Every detail is in its place.
Yeah, it is Anderson who has this aesthetic that makes his films like fairy tales for adults. Everything is perfect in them, from the set design to the music, his colors, the composition of the frame, and also the specific acting. All this creates a whole unique world. You can also see that for him, film is a way to create a kind of fairy tale reality. In which certain tragedies are deeply rooted, but they are presented in a completely different way.
It's amazing how he can weave serious topics into this very aesthetic exterior. In Moonrise Kingdom, we have childhood love that has its tragedies. In the Royal Tenenbaums, we see a family that is marked by various life failures.
Anderson is never afraid of serious topics, but he does it in such a way that everything is sweet in its own way.
But when we talk about art cinema, we have to move on to the figure who probably best represents this form through absolute control over every element. Stanley Kubrick. His films are like experiments that balance on the border between art and popular cinema.
2001: A Space Odyssey is probably one of the best examples of cinema that combines both high art and entertainment. Kubrick created a film that is, on the one hand, an intellectual challenge, but on the other, a visual masterpiece.
Kubrick really pushed the boundaries of convention. And I don't just mean 2001 The Space Odyssey. We have The Shining, which is completely different approach to horror. There is always something unsettling in his films, something that makes you feel like you have no control over what is happening on the screen.
His obsession with symmetry, detail, and slow paced action, all of this makes his films more philosophical and more psychological at the same time. Kubrick was able to change our idea of what cinema could be.
Yes, these details in his films are a real mathematics of image. Every frame is thought out, and yet there is something unpredictable about it. The Shining is a classic. By the way, this film is not only scary, it's deeply unsettling. The whole claustrophobic space of the hotel, the obsessive repetition of motifs, from music to images, creates a kind of a mental labyrinth.
Okay, what about David Lynch? He's probably the most capable of understanding our unconscious and transforming it into cinema.
Lynch is a completely different story. It's a film that is very surreal on one hand and disturbingly realistic on the other. In Mulholland Drive, we are dealing with a labyrinth of dreams and reality, in which there are no clear answers.
Each of his films is like a dream, full of symbols that can mean a million different things. His cinema does not explain, does not give us a solution. It rather draws us into a space of anxiety.
And that's what's amazing about Lynch, that his films never tell us directly what to think. They ask questions, leave space for interpretation. On the one hand, it's cinema full of darkness, and on the other, incredibly sensual. And besides, his entire work has the specific rhythm that makes even everyday life strange, and phenomena that at first glance seem real become something completely different.
Well, what's most important to me about Lynch is his border between dream and reality. How he can move from reality to fantasy, making us never sure where we really are.
And that is what makes his films never just an intellectual challenge. They are above all emotional because they engage our subconscious.
And finally, Almodovar. His cinema is something completely different. It is full of emotions, colors, and at the same time full of sophistication. In films like Talk to Her or Kika, you can see how much he loves theater, drama, opera. Everything is sensual and full of subtlety on the psychological level.
And you can see that in the way he builds the characters. Each one is a big, complex personality, full of contradictions and suffering, but also full of warmth and erotism. Almodovar creates characters who are both tragic and comic in a way that makes the stories more complete and more human.
Yeah, and that's why his cinema is so authentic. He's never afraid to show the most intimate emotions through which you can reach the truth about people. Almodovar's cinema is a cinema full of sensuality, which at the same time is not afraid of difficult topics. It's a very specific combination, like an opera, which combines both dramatic music and sensual gestures. That's all for today. Thank you and see you next week.